Hey everyone, it's Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. This week, we're going to tell you an incredible story. It's the story of an architect who started with £5,000, who used her knowledge to do multiple conversions and development projects until she had a shocking realisation that made her completely change her strategy. You're going to absolutely love her story.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for joining us. In case you don't know, we run a company that buys more than £100 million worth of property every year for our clients. You can find out about that at propertyhub.net/invest. And in the course of doing that, we hear a lot of fascinating stories. And the one our guest is sharing today is one of the very best. There are insights in this conversation that everyone can learn from. So stick around.
Before we get into that fascinating conversation, let's bring you some news. And it's more mortgage news. So last week we had Nick on giving us all the latest info on mortgages in the world of buy-to-let and beyond. I'd highly recommend you listen to that podcast because I did it in person with Nick and I felt we got into some really juicy stuff, including a little talked about topic of down valuations. I say it's a little topic because I don't see it being discussed anywhere else, but it is making huge waves in the property industry right now. So I'd highly recommend that you go back and listen to that episode. But we have more mortgage news. And the news is, Rob, and it's positive news, that mortgage rates have dropped below 4% for the first time in months. Now, this is not for buy-to-let mortgages, but it's for residential. But the fact is, if the market's moving that way, in general, it's a good sign.
It is. It's a very good sign. And if you look at swap rates, which are a big determinant of the cost of lender funding, and therefore the rates that you can get as a borrower, those have come way down over the last month or so. So, of course, investor rates are going to be higher than owner-occupier rates. But if you are buying at the moment, or you're going to be coming up to refinancing soon, then there could be more attractive deals around than you've seen for quite a while. Also news this week related that the Bank of England's governor, Andrew Bailey, has said this week that he believes that interest rates will be reduced again. That's under some doubt because inflation has proven to be a little bit higher than everyone expected. And of course, he doesn't know because things can change and it's not just him that decides. But these mortgage rates that we're seeing now are predicated on the market's general belief that borrowing costs are going to come down over the next couple of years. So if we're going to keep rates like we've got now, potentially even get better rates, then we need to see that base rate falling. Now, before we get into our main topic this week, now would be an excellent time to check out propertyhub.net/jobs. Because we are hiring and we have got some incredible roles up there at the moment, including a couple working directly with us in our marketing team. They're really pretty special. So if you are in the Manchester area or within striking distance, because these are hybrid roles, then get yourself over to propertyhub.net/jobs and see what we've got on offer.
So you're in for a real treat this week because Mr. D has sat down with a long-time listener, actually, of the podcast, Anushe. And as I've already alluded to at the top of the show, she's an experienced property investor, an architect, in fact, who used her knowledge and her belief that property was a good idea to start building a portfolio, but just with a £5,000 start as well. And you're about to find out that actually started with a one-bed flat in London. And from there, how she navigated the highs and lows of property investing to getting very focused and making a quite surprising shift to her strategy based on her experience as she progressed her portfolio. So it's a must listen for those people who are torn between different strategies. They are maybe flipping right now. Maybe they're doing developments. Maybe they're considering doing developments. Because Anushe's done so much and attacked property from so many different ways, I think there's something for everyone here, and there's going to be stuff that's either going to be super beneficial or something that's going to really relate to you. So let's pass it over to Mr. D and Anushe for an absolutely wonderful story.
The beginning is always a good start. You started back with nothing but a vague sense that investing in property was a good idea. Do you think that naivety was a positive, or did it lead you into mistakes that you could have avoided?
To be honest, I think sort of just getting started was probably the best thing I could have done because, as you say, it was just like a cultural sort of mindset because I'm actually from Bangladesh. And I don't know, just growing up, my grandparents, parents, everyone always spoke about, yes, you must buy property. That was kind of a thing. Had no idea why, but, when we were finally in a position to do so after I'd graduated from architecture, we just took the leap. And myself and my university friend, our dads gave us sort of £5,000 and we just got started and we just bought our first buy-to-let one bed in East London. And I had absolutely no idea why I was doing it. I just knew it was the right thing to do and it was a good idea. And of course, I've learned a hell of a lot since then.
So no goals, no ambitions, none of that stuff, just buy something.
Not at that stage, no, just because I didn't know how it would sort of pan out. And we knew it would be a positive move in terms of like, at least we're investing our money and hopefully it will grow. Didn't know how or why, but yeah, just and in what time scale. But it just felt like the right thing to do. And it was kind of brave because we were definitely being contrarian compared to all our friends who'd sort of said, oh, you know, what are you doing? Why are you taking on this liability now at this point in your life? Isn't that something you do when you settle down with somebody and buy somewhere to live? So in that sense, it was very different to what everybody else was doing. But yeah, myself and my friend just felt kind of excited by it and interested in it. And yeah, we just took the leap.
If we jump forward a few years from there, you said you bought your first home in 2004 and then you sold it a few years later, I know, for good profit. How much of that was your skill and how much of it was a rising market? Because 2004 up to about 2007, pretty good times for properties. Are you able to separate it out?
No, that is the honest answer. I really can't separate it out because obviously at the time we thought we were like really clever, you know, being architects, we loved doing up our own place. It was exciting. We were putting our skills to use. We didn't actually do it in order to make money. In all honesty, we were doing it because we wanted to. We bought something that was a bit sort of tired and it was to live in. You know, we lived in it for 3 years and it was just to kind of create an environment that we enjoyed and liked because we were architects and that was important to us. But of course, you know, when we sold in 2007, it was amazing. Looking back on it now, I think, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats, as the saying goes. And I definitely think we were one of those boats.
Do you think it was positive that you started in a forgiving market? Or if you'd learned tougher lessons earlier, would that have been helpful? It's hard to know, isn't it?
It is hard to know. And I think, I mean, we still had the same enthusiasm. And then, you know, once we'd had this great experience, of course, our plans got grander and we thought, right, we've got to do this every time now. And so we did take on another big project, much bigger this time, bought a 3-bed house, converted into 2 flats. So that was all new and a bit of a learning curve. And yeah, I think it definitely helped us stay positive. That's for sure. But of course, we all know what happened in 2008. So after we'd done that, we had a slightly different experience.
So one you bought in 2007, that house was for you two. You were going to live in one flat and then your sister was going to live in the other, right? So this was your home as well. A house into flats can be tricky, but there's 2 architects, right? What could go wrong? Did anything go wrong?
Several things went wrong. I'd rather not think about it or talk about it, but I will, as you've asked. Yeah, I mean, utility companies, they're fun to work with. I'm sure. I don't know if you have, and then sort of things going over budget. That wasn't easy. You know, it was a big project and we'd gutted the whole house. We'd done, rear extension. We'd done a first floor extension. Obviously, we ran out of money, so it couldn't go into the loft. So a lot of learning and a lot of pain. But yeah, we did produce 2 beautiful flats in the end and we did enjoy them. So, I mean, if that has a value. And they did get a good valuation at that point. But what happened was it kind of stayed static for a few years, obviously, because the market was struggling. So we'd added value at that point, but it didn't go up in the same way as the previous one.
What was it about the process? What aspect of it was harder than you thought it would be?
I think, obviously, it was, converting is, it's a whole new ball game. It's not the same as just refurbing. So there's sort of planning issues there, certain room sizes, minimum standards, all these sort of things. So regulations come into it a lot more. Although we're architects, we'd only been working for a few years. We weren't, sort of with 20 years under our belt at that point. So yeah, it was all a learning curve. You
said that you'd planned to do more projects on the homes that you lived in the future, which makes complete sense, right? This is something that a lot of people do because you don't pay capital gains tax on your own home. So tax-wise, it's a great strategy and we see people do it a lot. And especially being architects, it makes even more sense on paper for you to do that. But then you decided against doing that. Was that purely because the experience put you off or was the market involved in that decision?
So we definitely wanted to keep going and keep doing more because, as I said, it was also just about the enjoyment of living in a property that we designed. So that was kind of important to us. And even with the kind of increased costs and the pain and all of that. We were learning and we felt, we can keep going. But when the market sort of crashed, basically, as soon as we'd done this 3-bed house into 2 flats, we just had to sit tight and see what happened and wait. So it was more the market dictating things at that point. We still had the enthusiasm, but we just thought, credit had dried up. We weren't sure what we could do next. And of course, at that point, I'd had my son and, we had a young family. So we thought, no, we'll just sit tight and see what happens.
Yeah. But you did go back in, not on your own homes, but you got more involved in development projects. And that must have been a real leap because it involved selling the 2 buy-to-lets that you had at that point, right? To fund that venture.
Yep, exactly. The same university friend who I'd bought with back in 2001, he sort of wanted to give it a go. Basically, the market had started warming up again in 2011, 2012, and he sort of suggested it. And I just suddenly thought, I don't know if I was being sort of greedy or I just wanted to sort of shortcut the sort of property ladder and think actually by adding value, we could kind of go up the property ladder much more quickly and advance our sort of property journey. So I was a little bit hesitant because I was quite happy with the buy-to-lets, to be honest. They were going up nicely in value, we were getting regular rent. They weren't too much hassle. At that point, it just felt really manageable. So it was new territory for sure. I was a bit nervous, but we took the leap and we sold up and cashed out and went much bigger. We got investors on board. We went for much bigger houses. It was all being led by my friend. And we started sort of a different journey.
How did that feel different, both in terms of you were using investor money, which is different in itself, but you weren't in full control, you weren't in the driving seat because it was your friend doing this. So how difficult was it not being in control?
To some extent, we both had an input because obviously when it comes to the kind of planning drawings and the design of it and that kind of stuff, I definitely had some input there. But obviously I was juggling like a young family. At that time, I even had my own small photography business. So I just had too much going on. And that was we'd agreed that he'd be leading it.
How did it feel to have all these other relationships in it rather than just something that you were doing purely on your own?
So I think this time it was very different because when we'd done it before, we'd either done it for ourselves or we'd done it, a little bit on the side of our full-time jobs and our other roles. And the pressure wasn't there in the same way. This time there was a lot more financial pressure and obviously pressure to keep the investors happy and give them the returns that they'd like to see in order for us to keep going. So it was a completely different kind of pressure. Yeah. It was just a different ball game.
And how did those projects go?
When we first started in 2012, the first 2 projects, I think we did about 1 project a year roughly. They went really well. I think the first one was a flat and then the second one was like a house and they went pretty well. I can't tell you the actual process because obviously my friend faced the actual pain of the construction process, dealing with planners, builders, all of that. So I'm sure he had a lot of pain there. But in terms of value and adding value and the kind of valuations we got, we did really well. They sold relatively easily because obviously you make the money at the point of exit. So that all went really well. But following those 2, I think we did 3 more and they didn't go so well. The market started getting a bit wobbly and that was definitely affecting things. And things had gone wrong as well. So several things, there were unexpected things that went wrong. So I think at one point we had a terrible accountant who basically sort of wiped our tax returns that year, wiped out most of the profits. Then another time, I think there was some issue with the utility companies. Another time with some sort of a neighbor who was trying to block us from doing what we were doing. Because of course, often you have to get, if it's a flat, for example, you have to get sort of consent from the share of freeholders who also own properties in the building. Every time there was like a different issue and a new issue that we couldn't have foreseen. Yeah, so it was a lot harder.
Yeah. And how did you structure things with the investors? Did you only get paid after everyone else had been paid out or was it a profit share? How did you structure it?
No, it's exactly what you said. So we got paid out after everyone else was paid. And so that often meant that we didn't get paid very much because people had put their trust in us and we didn't want to let them down. We didn't want to give them terrible returns because then they wouldn't invest with us again. So yeah, we took the hit, basically. And that was painful too. But, our investors were good. They did keep investing with us for the subsequent ones. But yeah, it wasn't easy.
And what was that like for you? Were you relying on this income or counting on it in any way?
I think I was, in the sense that this was kind of, in architecture, my husband and I, we've always been sort of most of the time self-employed. So this was kind of meant to be like our sort of pension, we're going to grow this investment. And definitely I was counting on it in that sense, because it was getting harder. It was disappointing that we weren't getting the kind of returns that we were aiming for. And in that sense, yeah, it was definitely something that we were relying on in the sense of like a long-term investment, but maybe we weren't relying on it on a day-to-day, month-to-month basis, thankfully, because I think that would have been way more risky. We had our jobs. Saying that though, my friend was doing this full time. Actually, he was under a lot more pressure and it was quite different for him. And I wasn't up for taking that sort of risk at that point. So I was still working on other things, but he wanted to take the leap. So yeah, a lot more pressure on him. And I guess that put a lot more pressure on us, as a pair.
Yeah. And how did that feel?
I don't know. I mean, I'm quite an optimistic person. So I kept thinking maybe the next one will be better, and then you would embark on this next project. And of course, they last quite a long time. And what got harder was selling them on the market, especially after Brexit 2016. It was really painful. Obviously, as you know, when your holding costs are going up, while you're waiting to sell. So the longer it takes to sell, the less you're making. So it's all just kind of, the pressure just gets a lot more.
In the note you sent me before, I'm going to read out a quote from it, which is about a realization that you had, I believe, in 2019, which is where you said, you realized I would have made more money by doing nothing. The combination of capital gain and the inflation-proof rental income would have given me a better return and none of the development hassle. So tell me about how you came to that realization. How did you run those numbers? And then how does it feel to have to be like, oh, I could have just done nothing and been further ahead?
Yeah, that was quite a realization. So this came at a point in 2018 when my youngest had just started full-time school. And in all honesty, I finally sort of had the headspace to kind of sit down, because I wasn't working in it full-time the way my friend was. I just decided to sit down and kind of analyze all the figures and look at everything that we'd made since 2011, 2012, and really look at kind of, is it worth it? Because it has been kind of painful, whether it's been painful for both of us or for him in particular. I've seen him quite stressed out on numerous occasions. And I just thought, is all of this worth it? So what I did was I went on to Rightmove and I found the two properties that we bought way back in 2001 and 2004. And luckily, they'd been sold just sort of in the previous couple of years. And they'd been sold for a very decent amount. And when I kind of looked at that, and then I looked at current rental amounts, and I just did like a sort of calculation on, obviously, if the rent had gone up with inflation and what, looking at the rental today, how much would the total return be? And it eclipsed basically what I had made. And that would have been from basically doing nothing.
Yeah.
And that was the moment I decided I need to change strategy.
What kind of returns were you making from the developments, and what would you have made from the buy-to-lets if you just kept them?
So I think initially, the first couple, we did quite well. I think they were into sort of double-digit returns after all our costs and everything. So it was pretty good. Sort of, I'd say in the mid-teens, something like that. But the problem was with the latter ones, time eats into your return as well, right? So it's not just annual return anymore. Like the longer it's been on the market, your percentage is just dropping quite rapidly as your costs are just, going up. I just looked at the sort of overall return and it would have been substantially more. That's what I can say. And of course, you have to attribute some of that to the period during which properties were generally going up anyway. Markets rise and fall. But to me, the most shocking part was that would have been more without doing anything, without having any of that work that we put in, all that kind of headache and stress and waiting and uncertainty. I would have got that without any of that. And that's what was the most kind of shocking bit. And I just thought, oh my gosh.
Once you've realised that and done the calculation, was it then just like a clear cut, like, okay, I need to do this other thing? Or was that any of your identity tied up in doing developments? Because especially given your background, I imagine it could be quite hard to let go of.
I'm not saying I'm never going to do another development, but I certainly wouldn't do it in that way, like doing flips, for example. I think developing where you live, adding value where you live, that would probably be the way I'd do it next if I did it again. But doing it as a business model or as an investment model, no, I don't think so. I'm not going back there again. To me, it just wasn't worth the amount of hassle, in all honesty. And I don't think in terms of identity, I think because my friend was the one leading it, I wasn't that involved in the kind of day-to-day. And you know what? I'll always be an architect. I'll always design stuff. But yeah, not in terms of doing it as a business model. And that's what I definitely learned, that it's not worth it. You know, if the market's really hot and everybody's doing it and everything's going up, maybe. But even then, it's not something for me anymore. And I think others can benefit from it if they've got the energy and the drive and sort of their youth to go through all that pain. That's fine. But it's just not worth it for me for all the pain.
No, it's the glamorous side of property. It's the stuff that you make TV shows about. There aren't many TV shows where someone just gets a bank transfer of the rent every so often and goes about their day, because it wouldn't be very entertaining. And so it's the thing that attracts people. And we hear from a lot of people who are maybe doing a job that they don't enjoy very much and they want to swap that for a job in property. But I think the problem with that, as you've discovered, is that the way to have a job in property is pretty much to do developments and do projects like that. But that does put you under so much stress. It's great to get a lump of money, but you only get it when you sell and you have no idea when that's going to be. And I think that's the hard part. It sounds like you were in a position where you weren't relying on it for a month-to-month income. But if you were, that's got to be pretty stressful. Every time the utility company decides to like bump your date by a couple of months for no reason, that delays you getting paid.
Exactly. And there is that thing of like, you only hear about the success stories. You don't hear about when things have gone wrong. So that's why I'm like really happy to share about this, because it's just not easy. And you're sort of putting all your eggs in one basket. It's just really high risk. So yeah, sure. If you're willing to take those kind of risks, go for it. But for me, I'd say I'm a medium risk person. I'm always out for investing and learning and exploring and researching, but not to that extent, because it literally can wipe out so much of your returns. One single thing can wipe everything out. So in that sense, it's just way too high risk, I think, in my opinion.
How do you think about the transition from that to what you decided to do next as an investment? What was your thought process?
In all honesty, I kind of went back to the start. So just decided that, hang on a minute, when we started this journey, I might not have known much about it. There weren't many resources back in the day, and we'd just taken the leap and we bought those couple of buy-to-lets. But I just felt like it just worked. I just thought, I'm going to go back to that and just go back to the beginning and go back to the fundamentals of why actually over the long term, that is the safest and also most lucrative, I think, way of investing without taking those kind of crazy risks and all of that pain. And so I just went back to that. And of course, I've been listening to your wonderful podcast since 2012. So I was kind of learning a bit about long-term property investing anyway in the background. But at that point, all my capital was tied up. We were doing these developments. I wasn't really in the position. But in 2018, I decided to take quite a drastic decision. I just told my friend, I'm really sorry, but I think we should be doing this. And I actually did propose that to him as a strategy. And I don't know why, but he kind of wasn't really on board with that. So we decided to basically go our separate ways. And that's kind of when I changed strategies and started doing long-term buy-to-lets. And I'm super happy with how far we've come with that.
And at the point of doing that research, was it still clear that property was going to be the thing? Or was there any sense of like, sod all this property stuff, I'm just going to go and put it in index funds and be done with it?
No, I mean, I love property because ultimately with property, you've got bricks and mortar, right? So no matter what, your downside is limited. And believe it or not, if you're a risk-averse person, that's the best thing, because no matter what, you've still got a solid, tangible asset. Whereas stocks and shares are great. Index funds, obviously, are diversified. Those are great as well. A stock of a company can go to zero. A property can never go to zero.
What I think is interesting is you didn't just go back to exactly what you were doing before. Like, you didn't just go and say, well, I'm going to buy something locally and rent it out and hold on to it. You went completely the other extreme and you started buying with us in other parts of the country and being ultra hands-off. How did that happen?
I mean, in all honesty, it's just from all the learning. I basically, in 2019, when we sort of sold that final last property, which again took a long time to offload, but once it was, I finally had the capital and I thought, right, I'm just going to go all in on this learning. Because obviously I've been listening for a long time. I've read all your books. I've read other material as well. And I just thought, no, I'm just going to go supercharge my learning. And it was so obvious to me. It was just really obvious. I just thought, well, in terms of wages and average property prices, it just made complete sense. And then when you guys talk about the fundamentals of certain areas, transport, business, employment, you've done all that hard work and all that research. It just makes sense for me to use that. And I just think London just didn't make any sense anymore at that time anyway, to me. And it probably still doesn't, to be honest. And I think the other reason was also diversification. Just not putting all your eggs in one basket. Because obviously I'd got back a lump of capital and the decision was, well, how do you employ that capital? And the problem with London is that you can't really diversify. It's so expensive. You end up putting a vast majority into just one or two or a few properties. And the beauty of up north is you can spread your risk. You can kind of buy different typologies. You can buy different locations. So you can diversify. And that made me feel really comfortable. And that's why I decided to go for.
Was there any fear around investing in areas, cities that you didn't particularly know?
Your marketing team do a great job. So when I got the material, I would read up on it. I would look into it. But in all honesty, I think there's a trust there because I've been following you guys for a long time. I followed your journey. And even though I don't know those areas, it makes sense, everything you put forward about the employment there, the demand for property, for renting, and all of that. It just made sense to me. And I just think sometimes you can't overthink these things. You can have analysis paralysis, and I'm a quite pragmatic person. I just wanted to get on with it. So I was very happy to take the leap.
Did you visit any of the properties before you bought them?
I didn't visit the first one. So that was in Doncaster, which is a house, 3-bed house. Didn't visit that one. I was quite happy not to, didn't really get the chance or the opportunity. With the second one, we decided to pop over there for a weekend when it first completed. And that was quite fun because we had the kids and we just had a weekend walking around Birmingham, and that was good. And then I did visit another one as well for almost the same reason, just to go and check out a new place and have a walk around. So I'd never been to Manchester, believe it or not. And I ended up buying sort of 3. But yeah, for the first one that we bought, we decided to have a weekend there as well. And it was the same thing. We actually stayed in the property because obviously you have the companies that come in and furnish it all and do it all. So you just walk in, it's all ready to roll. And yeah, we just had a little jaunt around Manchester, which was really nice.
And for you now, is it a pure investment? Is there any emotion around your house in Doncaster or any of the others? Or is it just like a box that spits out a number? That may sound awful, but you know what I mean?
You know, you have to kind of like property, right? You can't invest in property if you just don't like property in the first place. So I'll always like the properties I've bought. And actually, I'm quite fussy because obviously you guys put forward a lot of different options and a lot of different offers. And I don't always like them because it may not kind of go with my architectural taste. For example, I still look at the architecture. I still look at the layouts and the kind of overall look and feel. And do I like it? So it has to still resonate with me and with my husband. We definitely look through all your sort of material and brochure and stuff and decide whether we kind of fancy it. So there is that kind of connection for sure. But in terms of anything else, no, not really, not more than that. I mean, we're proud of our portfolio because we like all the properties we've bought. And it's not just a box that spits out a number, as you say, but we see it more as a portfolio rather than individual property. They each have their strengths and different locations, different types. So we see it very much as one sort of portfolio.
And how have you thought about constructing that portfolio? It sounds that you've been somewhat deliberate about getting an element of diversification.
Definitely. I think, again, just learning about how important diversification is, I just thought it just made sense. I remember actually talking to somebody, a property investor, who'd, during COVID, all his properties were right next to Heathrow. And imagine all his tenants left. And I just thought, actually, diversification is important. So whether you're letting to a young family or a professional or an older couple or something, I mean, you're just having different types of properties and in different areas, city centre, on the edge of the city, commuter areas. I just think it mixes it up. It's interesting as well. And at the same time, you're getting that diversification. So 100% that was on our minds when we sort of embarked on this journey.
And this is a dangerous question. But how has the reality matched up to the dream? The hands-off, passive dream of someone else finds them, someone else manages them. It sounds great, but what's the reality been like?
I think it's been brilliant. They've all been managed by agents. I send a few emails every now and then. And of course, there's times when there's like a void or something. You feel a little bit nervous. But to be honest, things have been pretty okay since things recovered after COVID. And it's never been anything too bad. And because they're all new, there's no real kind of maintenance issues. I think there was one tiny issue with something, but again, just easily resolved. I just treat it like a business. And it's like, okay, well, there's going to be a few costs here and there. That's part of business. And of course, I set aside money for that. It's all part of my calculation when I'm buying. So no real surprises or nothing scary or crazy. And yeah, that's how I like it. Nice and calm and generally manageable. Definitely, I put in a bit of time, I think, and I have some flexibility in my work because obviously we have our own architecture business. So that helps for sure. But it's not been like mammoth amounts of time because they are being managed.
What do you hope your portfolio does for you? What is your goal? Where do you want to get to?
As I mentioned, my husband and I are both architects and, our pensions have never been great. Yeah, we see it as a pension, basically, something that can kind of help us retire earlier than we would normally have retired and give us a bit of financial freedom, really. And that's basically our goal. And the beauty of property is that if you create a portfolio, and you remortgage, you can grow that portfolio, or you can extract some of it, or you can sell a couple and pay off the mortgage to the others, and you have just a brilliant income stream, and you can pass it on. So we've got 2 kids. So that's definitely something that's on the cards, like sort of drip feeding them some of the shares of the portfolio as we go along as they get older, and then maybe sort of teach them a few of the tricks of the trade. And yeah, that's kind of how we see our future, really.
If someone's debating between, they're in a position where they could do active, not necessarily development, but refurbs, that kind of hands-on stuff versus just the straight buy-to-let. You've done both. What do you think is the tell that can guide their decision? Because there's always like, yes, you can just go and be passive and it'll all work out in the long run, or you can give it a bit of a push. If you just do that refurb or build the extension or whatever, you can pull money out, you can go fast, you can get higher returns, whatever. What do you think people should be thinking about to help them make that decision and work out what's right for them?
I think it's really important to look at your personal circumstances. So how much time can you give it? Because it's quite time consuming doing developments. I can tell you that right now. I mean, yes, we did a lot of the actual architectural side of things ourselves, which added more time to our sort of involvement. But just the process itself, things will go wrong. You will need to be present. You will need to be there. So if you have a job where your headspace doesn't allow that, then really think carefully about doing that. Secondly, do your research. I'm not saying you can't do it, but just do your research on kind of the market at the time that you want to launch into this. Is it a rising market where you want to do it? That's super important. That was one of the most key things for us in terms of making any sort of return. And then also, I'd say, obviously, if you can start small, like maybe on your own property where you improve the one that you're living in, that's a great way to start because your risks are already lowered because you're going to live in it anyway. In terms of selling it, if you do sell on, you don't pay the capital gains. So that's a great way to dip your toes into the water. But I would just kind of try and look at all the risks possible and think of how you can minimize them or mitigate them because it is challenging. But if the conditions are right and if you're in the right headspace personally, in your life, in your work, with your family, then yeah, I mean, go for it. We did it and we learned and we rode the wave. I wouldn't discourage anybody, but yeah, you definitely have to look at all those things.
Do you think you're a better investor now for having gone through that experience?
Do you know what? Strangely, they're so different. I feel like they're 2 different worlds in many ways, and they're just almost like 2 completely different business models. I almost feel like even if I hadn't done all that developing, I don't think it would have affected the way I handle the buy-to-lets because just so much of it is just cut out of the process. You just don't have any of that. The construction, the kind of competing with other people. Because, usually when there's a tired property, you'll face a lot of competition. It's not just going to be you wanting to do it up. All of that stress, you just don't have any of that. It's almost like you've just skipped a whole load of steps. It's just a very different beast, I think.
I think it's really interesting how you said mindset in your previous answer, which I completely agree with, because I think people talk about time a lot, and I'm guilty of this. I talk about, like, have you got the time to do it? But in a sense, everyone's got the same amount of time, and you could always make time. But having the headspace is almost more limited if you're at a certain stage in life. And having young kids now, it's just like, yeah, I might technically have the time, but there's no way I've got the headspace for this, and that's probably a more important factor to be thinking about.
I love that, Rob. I really enjoyed that. Thank you, Anushe, and thank you for putting that interview together. There's quite a lot in that, but what did you learn from that episode? Like, what did you take away that you thought, wow, okay, that's made me think a bit differently than before?
Well, yes, first of all, thank you to Anushe. She's been such a great supporter of everything that we've done for such a long time. And really great to have her on the show at last. But I think the element of our conversation that really stood out to me was the importance of the market when it comes to flipping, developing, refurbing, and almost the lack of importance of the market when it comes to what she's doing now, which is just buy and hold, because she was involved in projects when the market was doing well. And of course, she was doing great projects because she's an architect. She will have done a great job. But even so, if the market is not on your side, it's so hard to generate returns that make all the risk and the effort worthwhile. So I think what I came to appreciate, Rob, is we often talk about strategies in terms of your personality, your situation, your goals, and all of that is true. But timing is so important. There are windows that are suited to those type of strategies, and possibly far bigger windows that are not, that they're either actively unhelpful or where the market just isn't giving you enough of a push to make those high returns that make it worthwhile. And you can hear in the conversation how much more relaxed Anushe is now, that her investments are just there in the background doing their thing.
I think what's important to remember is it's not trying to convince you on a certain strategy, because it's going to be down to you, your circumstances. There is no one strategy fits all approach. I think what's important, at least is what I took from this, is having the conviction to make that strategy change. We've gone on record many times, Rob, talking about how we changed our approach. Probably, definitely a little later than we should have, but we still made that change. And it's easy to say, but it's actually hard to do when you're living it. When you've done something a certain way for a number of years, it's normally the more comfortable thing to carry on doing. But making that shift, making that change, being willing to make that shift and change can really pay off. It's really paid off for us, and it's really paid off for Anushe. And I hope other people listening, particularly if you are an established property investor already, is I'm not saying rip up everything you've done before and make a change, but at least contemplate it, assess it, and go, is what I'm doing today the right thing? Is it the right strategy today? It may have been 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, depending on how long you've been investing. But is it the right thing to do today? And if you're a new investor, you have one strategy today, and hopefully it's the right one for you. But be open and have the awareness that you may need to change in the future. And I think if you do that, you can be far more effective as a property investor. You don't have to have one strategy for life, is a big, important lesson here. We certainly haven't had that, and Anushe hasn't either. And I think that's a big lesson to take away.
Okay, time now for Hub Extra, the part of the show where just before we finish, we try to squeeze in that little bit more, something you can take away and enjoy or put to good use. And Rob, this week's Hub Extra is inspired by a trip you took to Dubai. So before we get into what Hub Extra actually is, how was that trip? Because you were not there on holiday.
No, I wasn't, although it would have been lovely to be there on holiday this time of year. But I was there for business and for Property Hub. And it was amazing because we had a meetup out there and a lot of meetings around it as well. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to everybody who attended the event. It was one of the most enjoyable events I've ever done. And I'm not just saying that. I did say that straight after to Rob the next day. I really, really enjoyed the event. I just thought the people there were just really on it. And I think that's something I've taken from Dubai as well, is that how on it or driven or focused people are there. 90% of the people who live in Dubai are expats, which has got to be the highest in the world, right? Or one of them. But with that brings people who've all moved to an area to improve things for themselves, to try something new, to level up from where they were before. And I just love that mindset. Absolutely adore that mindset. And I found myself thinking, I love this city. Like, I love this place. I love the energy of it. I imagine it was what New York was like 40 years ago, where people moved to New York to make something of themselves. I feel Dubai is that city. And it may not be for everyone, and that's absolutely fine. But what I would say is it was surprising, having been there on holiday before and then experiencing it in business mode, the energy, the drive of the place, the people that live in that place is just fascinating. And we'll talk about it more on AOB, some of the lessons, some of the interesting insights I took away from that trip and much more. We've got an AOB episode coming up soon, so do listen to that if you're interested in hearing more. But I was very, very motivated after returning from that trip. So thank you to everyone we met there. The nice little hub extra I have for everybody is in isolation, not something new. I don't think it will be. It's Rotten Tomatoes, which is a review website. But I treated myself to watching a film on the way out and a film on the way back. It's quite a long flight, so I used part of it to watch a film. Now, I was travelling with BA, and you get lots of different options when you travel on long haul. And I didn't want to waste my time. I don't often sit down and watch a film, so I wanted to make the most of it. So while I was on the tarmac, I quickly got out my phone and went through some of the options. And I found out that a lot of the films on there, according to reviews, the critics, were absolutely terrible. But I managed to, by just quickly getting out my phone, checking the reviews of what is on there, to watch 2 great films. And I'll give you those 2 films in a second. Now, you can do it while you're at the airport, while you're on the tarmac if you want, or you can do it in advance. You can actually go and see what films your airline is showing if you do a long haul flight. I think it's worth that time, particularly if you intend to watch a film, because I spoke to other people who'd also been on the same flight and they'd watched films that were so-so. So I'd recommend doing that. The 2 films, you may have watched them, you may have not. Very, very, very different films, I might add. On the way out, I watched Oppenheimer. Absolutely brilliant film. Long film, but it had me the whole way through. It had my attention. A tense film. I wouldn't say too much, but it's the story of the creation of the nuclear bomb. I don't think I'm giving anything away there. I think everyone knows what happened in the end. But the story leading up to it is a real intense one. Great acting. Just a wonderful, wonderful film. And then slight contrast on the way back, I watched Deadpool versus Wolverine, which just had me laughing out loud on the plane, looking a bit weird. And I absolutely enjoyed that. It was a good end to the trip, having a laugh to that film. I haven't watched any of the Deadpool films as well, but it was so highly recommended on Rotten Tomatoes, I thought I've got to give it a go, and I was very glad I did. So 2 film recommendations and a little travel hack for you as well.
Well, there you go, travel hacks, movie tips, and a great interview this week. What more do you want from the Property Podcast? Well, we'll be back to see if we can beat this effort next week. We're here every Thursday, as well as with Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday, and you can catch us in the Sunday Times on Sunday as well. So loads to look forward to, but until we see you next, have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.